All right, so this is one of those stories I'd rather never have to write, but I have to. I've been spiraling for days, and maybe putting this out there will keep me from losing my mind completely, or maybe it'll just give me some sense of control. I don't know. I guess you can be the judge of that. All I know is that my life's completely fucked, and I think I'm next. It started about a month ago. My friend Mike, that one friend who's always doing dumb shit just for the thrill of it. Yeah, that was Mike. He's the type who would go deep into the sketchiest corners of the dark web just to see what's there, for fun. I told him to stop, that he was going to get himself into some serious trouble, but he'd just laugh it off and say it's all just pixels and bullshit. So when he told me he found something really fucked up and needed to show me, I wasn't exactly surprised. We met up at his place, and he was just off. Like Mike was usually this energetic guy, always cracking jokes, but that day he was quiet, nervous even. I asked him what the hell was wrong, and all he did was hand me this small, old-looking journal. He said he bought it off the dark web for next to nothing, and that it was supposed to be the diary of a serial killer. At first I thought he was screwing with me, like maybe he bought some fake, edgy crap from a scammer trying to make a quick buck. But when I started flipping through the pages, man, I realized this was different. The handwriting alone was enough to make my skin crawl, sharp, jittery, like someone was carving the letters into the page instead of writing them. The first few entries were typical psycho stuff, talking about urges and fantasies, things you'd expect a killer to write. But then it got detailed, too detailed. Each entry was dated, and it was like the killer was recording his hunts, describing exactly what he did to his victims, step by step. But it wasn't just that. There were names, real names. And that's when Mike told me he started Googling them. That's when things got real. The names matched actual missing people. Every single one. We're talking men, women, even a couple of kids, all disappeared in the last 10 years. He showed me news articles, Reddit threads, even obituaries. Every victim the guy wrote about was a real person, someone who just vanished without a trace. The descriptions in the diary lined up perfectly with the little info the cops released. I felt sick to my stomach. Mike, though, he looked excited, like he just cracked some huge mystery, but I could see something was eating at him too. I asked him if he tried to figure out who the killer was, but he said the journal was anonymous. No names, no locations, just sickening graphic details of what this guy did. The more I read, the worse it got. This wasn't just some guy killing for kicks. He had rituals. He'd take things, locks of hair, teeth, pieces of skin, and keep them as trophies. And the way he described the murders, there was pleasure in every word. He'd talk about the fear in their eyes, the sound of their last breaths, and how he'd watch the life drain out of them, savouring every second. And then there were the drawings. Scattered between the entries were these rough sketches, pictures of people tied up, gagged, mutilated. They were crude, but you could tell they were done from memory. They were the victims. And in the margins, there were numbers, like a tally or a countdown. By this point, I was freaked out, but Mike, he was too far gone. He was obsessed. He spent days combing through the diary, matching more names, trying to figure out the killer's next move. Then, about 2 weeks ago, he sent me a message that made my blood run cold. Dude, I think he's still killing. I called him immediately and he sounded manic. He told me he found a recent entry, one that wasn't in the news yet. The name was someone new, a woman in her 30s, and when Mike searched her name, there was nothing. No missing reports, no news articles. But then he found her Facebook and there she was, posting like everything was normal. That was until 3 days later, when she disappeared. Gone. Just like the others. Mike was losing it. He started freaking out, saying the killer might still be out there hunting, documenting his murders like some twisted hobby. I told him to go to the cops, but he didn't want to. He thought they wouldn't believe him. After all, it was just a diary from the dark web, right? Then last week, Mike stopped answering my calls. No texts, no messages, nothing. I went to his place, banged on the door for an hour, but there was no response. The next day, I saw the news. Mike was dead. They found him in his apartment, throat slit, his body posed like one of the sketches in the diary. The cops ruled it a suicide at first, but I fucking knew. It was too similar, too perfect. This was the killer. He found Mike, and he finished his sick little game. But here's the thing that's been eating me alive. 2 days before he died, Mike sent me one last message. I didn't see it until after I found out he was dead. It was just one line, but it's been burned into my brain ever since. I found your name in the book. I'll be honest with you, after reading that last message from Mike, I completely lost my shit. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I was going to pass out. I couldn't move, I couldn't think. It was just this pure, raw terror. I read that sentence over and over again, praying that I'd misunderstood it somehow. Maybe Mike was screwing with me, one last fucked up joke before things got out of hand, but deep down I knew he wasn't joking. I thought about going to the cops right then and there, but what the hell was I supposed to tell them? Hey, my friend bought a serial killer's diary off the dark web, and now I think I'm next on the list. I could already picture the cop's face, the way they'd roll their eyes or give me that half-hearted we'll look into it bullshit. I mean, I had no proof. The diary was still at Mike's place, and he was dead. I didn't have it. All I had was that text message and this growing, gut-wrenching feeling that I was being watched. I don't know how to explain it, but after Mike died, it felt like the walls were closing in on me. Every little sound freaked me out. I'd hear creaking in the house late at night, stuff that I'd normally shrug off. But now, every little noise felt like someone was right outside my door. I started locking everything, windows, doors, hell. I even shoved furniture in front of the front door at night. Paranoid, sure, but you'd be too if you knew what I knew. It wasn't just the fear that got to me, though. It was the feeling of being hunted. I could feel it in my bones, like this shadow was creeping closer and closer, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do about it. Then one night, shit got real. I was lying in bed, tossing and turning like usual when I heard it. A faint knock. It was so soft I almost thought I imagined it, but then it came again, slow, deliberate. Like whoever it was wanted me to hear it, but didn't want to wake the neighbours. My stomach dropped and I just lay there, frozen, staring at the ceiling, hoping it was just some drunk guy at the wrong house. But then the knock came again, louder, closer. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. It was 2:34 a.m. No one knocks at that time unless they mean trouble. I didn't move. I just waited, holding my breath, praying they'd go away. For a minute, everything went quiet again. I thought maybe I'd lucked out. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. All it said was, "I see you." I swear to God, my blood ran cold. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding so loud it was in my ears. I ran to the front window, just barely pulling back the curtain enough to peek outside, but the street was dead. No cars, no people, just the glow of the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. I checked all the doors and windows again, triple-checked the locks. I even pulled out the old baseball bat I kept in the closet. I wasn't thinking straight. I didn't know what else to do. I just knew that whoever sent that text knew where I was. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just sat in the corner of my living room with the bat in my hand, eyes glued to the door, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The next morning I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The timing, the knock, the text, it was too perfect, too precise. I knew I had to find that diary. If Mike really saw my name in it, I needed to know why. I needed to know what the killer wrote about me. So I decided to go back to Mike's place, even though the thought of stepping into that apartment made my skin crawl. When I got there, the place was taped off, like you'd expect from a crime scene. But I knew Mike kept a spare key in a little hollow under the porch. We used to joke about how dumb it was to keep a key outside, but now it was the only thing that got me inside. I ducked under the tape, my heart pounding the whole time, and unlocked the door. The smell hit me first. It was stale, rotten. I gagged a little, holding my shirt over my nose. Mike's apartment was a wreck. The cops had torn through the place, flipping everything upside down, probably looking for clues. And his laptop was gone, the couch cushions were slashed open and papers were scattered everywhere. But I wasn't there for any of that. I needed the diary. I remembered Mike saying he kept it in his closet, hidden under a pile of old shoes and clothes, so I headed straight there. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely move the junk out of the way. But after what felt like forever, I found it. That old tattered leather book. Just holding it made me want to throw up, but I couldn't stop now. I opened it to the last entry, praying it wasn't real, that this was all some horrible mistake. But there it was, right in front of me, my name, written in that same jagged, scratchy handwriting. And next to it, a date. Tomorrow. I dropped the diary and stumbled back, my head spinning. The killer wasn't just messing with me, he was planning something. Tomorrow. It was all right there, in his own fucked up handwriting. That's when I realized it. Mike wasn't the last victim. I am. I don't even know how I made it out of Mike's place without passing out or losing my mind. Everything inside me was screaming to run, to get as far away from that cursed diary as possible, but my legs felt like they were moving on autopilot. I stuffed the diary into my backpack, locked up behind me, and bolted out of there like someone was already on my tail. By the time I got home, it was already getting dark. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely fit the key into the lock. Every shadow on the street looked like it was moving, like someone was hiding behind them, waiting for the right moment to strike. I slammed the door shut behind me, bolted every lock, and shoved my couch up against it for good measure. I turned on every light in the house. I didn't care if it made me look paranoid. I was paranoid. The first thing I did was take out the diary again, flipping through it like I'd somehow missed something. Anything that would give me a clue about what the hell I was supposed to do. But there wasn't much more to find. Just entry after entry of this psychopath talking about his kills, the way he stalked them, and how he always knew everything about his victims before he even made his first move. Their schedules, their routines, their friends, family. This guy studied them like they were lab rats. By the time he was done with them, he probably knew more about their lives than they did. And now, my name was in his book, with a date. Tomorrow. The whole time I couldn't shake this feeling like I was being watched. I kept glancing at the windows, at the dark spaces between the curtains. There was this pressure, this gut-deep instinct that told me not to stand too close, not to let myself be seen. Because he could be out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to come in and finish what he started with Mike. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another text from that unknown number, but nothing came. Every minute felt like an hour, and I couldn't sit still. I paced around the house, checking the locks, the windows, even opening the fridge just to give myself something to do. But no matter what I did, the fear wouldn't go away.
I tried calling a few friends, but no one picked up. Not surprising, since it was late by then, but that only made things worse. It felt like the world had gone completely silent, like I was alone in a bubble that was about to burst. At some point, I ended up sitting in the middle of my living room floor with the bat resting across my lap, just staring at the clock. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling like it was bringing me closer to something inevitable. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Mike was found. His throat slit, posed like one of those sick sketches. That was going to be me. I could feel it. Tomorrow wasn't just a date, it was my expiration date. But then a thought hit me. What if I left? Like, packed my bags and just got the hell out of town? I still had a little time. The killer had planned for tomorrow, right? If I wasn't here, maybe I could throw him off, buy myself some time. Maybe he wouldn't follow me. I shot up, adrenaline pumping through my veins, and started throwing clothes into a bag. I didn't even know where I was going to go, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere that wasn't here. I grabbed my wallet, my keys, and stuffed the diary into the bag too. If anyone needed proof of what was happening, it was in that damn book. I was almost out the door when I saw it. A letter, sitting right on my kitchen counter, like it had been there all along. I knew it wasn't there earlier. I'd been in and out of the kitchen a dozen times that night. But there it was, a plain white envelope with no name, no address. Just sitting there waiting for me. My heart was in my throat as I picked it up, hands shaking so badly I could barely tear it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded neatly. I unfolded it, and my blood ran cold when I saw the words, written in that same jagged, familiar handwriting. "You can't run," that's all it said. 4 words that felt like they'd been carved directly into my brain. I stared at it for what felt like forever, my mind racing. He'd been in my house. While I was there, while I was checking the windows, the doors, while I thought I was being so careful, he had been inside. Left me this message like it was some kind of game, just to let me know I wasn't in control. That no matter what I did, he was already ahead of me. The fear was crushing at that point. It felt like my chest was caving in, like I couldn't breathe. I dropped the letter and started scanning every corner of the house, checking every closet, under the bed, behind the curtains, anywhere someone could hide. I was so frantic I even pulled the damn shower curtain back, half expecting to see him standing there with a knife, ready to finish it. But no one was there. Just me, and that sick feeling of helplessness. I knew running wasn't an option anymore. If he'd been inside already, he probably knew I was planning to leave. He was watching me, maybe even right now. I tried to think, tried to come up with some kind of plan, but my mind was spinning. Do I go to the cops? They didn't even buy Mike's story. They'd think I was paranoid, or worse, maybe they'd think I was involved in Mike's death somehow. They didn't have the diary. They didn't know what was coming. I started to feel trapped, like there was no way out. I was running out of time, and I had no idea what this guy wanted or why he was targeting me. My name in that diary, it wasn't a coincidence. He knew something about me, just like he knew about all his other victims. The thought made me sick. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. So I did the only thing I could think of. I opened the diary again. I forced myself to flip back through the pages, looking for any clue that could tell me why I was on his list. I scanned each entry, my heart pounding as I saw the detailed descriptions of his other victims. But there was nothing specific about why he chose them. No real pattern, no motives. Just people he'd stalked, studied, and eventually killed. And then, near the back of the book, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A symbol. Drawn in the corner of one of the pages. A crude, hand-drawn symbol that looked like a circle with lines cutting through it. I don't know why, but it stood out to me, like it didn't belong with the rest of the writing. It wasn't something he did for any of the other victims, at least not that I'd seen. And the weird thing, I'd seen it before. Not in the diary, but in real life. Somewhere familiar. That symbol, it was the same one that Mike had tattooed on his arm. A small, barely noticeable thing he'd gotten years ago, something he'd never really talked about. Just one of those stupid, random tattoos you get when you're young and drunk. But now, it didn't feel random at all.
I don't know what it means, or how it ties into everything, but my gut tells me this isn't just some random serial killer. There's something bigger going on here, something Mike and I were both a part of without even realizing it. And now, with less than 24 hours left until tomorrow, I'm starting to think this was never about me or Mike. It was about both of us from the very beginning. I barely slept after finding that symbol. How could I? I kept staring at it, flipping between the diary and memories of Mike's tattoo, trying to connect the dots. My brain was a mess. like I was trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces were missing. But one thing was clear. This wasn't random. This killer had been tracking us, both of us, for years, maybe even longer. It wasn't just some sick game he'd picked up recently. It went deeper than that. By the time morning rolled around, I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. My body was exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every little noise outside had me on edge. Cars driving by, people walking their dogs, the distant sound of kids on their way to school. It was like the world was moving on, but I was stuck, waiting for the hammer to drop. I couldn't shake the feeling that today was the day everything would come crashing down. I kept checking my phone, half expecting another text or some clue that something was about to happen, but nothing came. The silence was worse than anything. I didn't know if that meant he was planning something or if he was already inside, just waiting for the right moment. Every time I looked at the clock, I felt like the minutes were slipping through my fingers, pulling me closer to whatever he had planned. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. So I grabbed my keys, threw on a jacket, and left. No real plan, just get the hell out and keep moving. Maybe if I was out in public, somewhere with people around, he wouldn't be able to get to me. That was the hope, anyway. I ended up driving aimlessly around town, sticking to crowded areas, parking lots, shopping centres, anywhere that felt safe. But it wasn't. That pressure, that weight of being hunted, followed me everywhere. I'd park the car, sit for a few minutes, and then get that itch in the back of my neck, that gut feeling like someone was watching me. So I'd move again, trying to outpace the fear, but no matter where I went, it was like he was just one step behind me. Around noon, I parked outside a coffee shop. I hadn't eaten all day, and I figured I could at least try to get something in my system. I sat down at a table near the window, my back to the wall so I could see everyone coming and going. I don't know why, but I felt safer that way. Like if I could see him coming, I'd have a chance. I pulled out my phone, mindlessly scrolling through apps, trying to distract myself from the ticking clock in my head. That's when I saw it. A notification. A new email. My stomach dropped the second I saw the subject line. From Mike. I almost didn't open it. Part of me didn't want to. Mike was dead. I knew that. There was no way he could have sent me anything. But my hands moved on their own, shaky fingers tapping the screen to open the message. It wasn't long. Just a few lines, but they hit me like a ton of bricks. If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I didn't want to drag you into this, but I think it's too late. The diary wasn't just something I found. It's connected to us. To you. Remember the symbol. I know you've seen it before. You have to figure out why, before it's too late. My heart was racing as I read it over and over again, trying to make sense of what he meant. Connected to us. What the hell was he talking about? The symbol, the tattoo. Sure, that was weird, but how did it connect to both of us? And why was it in the diary? I was spiraling again, my thoughts racing, trying to piece together something that still felt like a mystery. Mike had been in deeper than I thought, and whatever he'd gotten into, I was now a part of it too. It wasn't just about me being a target. It was like we were tied to this whole thing in some way I couldn't understand. I got up from the table, leaving my barely touched coffee behind, and headed back to the car. I couldn't sit still. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to find them by hiding out in some cafe. As I started the car, my mind raced. There had to be someone who could help. I thought about reaching out to Mike's family, maybe see if they knew anything about his tattoo or if he'd been acting strange before all this started. But something told me that was a dead end. Mike wasn't the type to share this kind of stuff with anyone, not even his family. No, if there were answers, they had to be buried somewhere in the past, in something we both shared. And that's when it hit me.
The tattoo. Mike had gotten it after that summer we both worked at the same shitty gas station on the edge of town. I hadn't thought about that place in years, but now, as the memory came flooding back, I realized there was something off about that time. Something I hadn't noticed back then, but now seemed too important to ignore. there was a guy. He used to come into the gas station almost every night, always around closing time. Older dude, probably in his 40s, with this greasy, unkempt look, like he hadn't showered in weeks. Mike and I used to joke that he looked like a serial killer, always lurking in the shadows, buying weird stuff like duct tape, knives, and garbage bags. But there was something else about him, something that at the time I brushed off as just creepy vibes. But now I wasn't so sure. He had that symbol on his forearm, tattooed in the same crude way Mike had it. I remember asking Mike about it once, but he just laughed it off, saying it was no big deal. He'd gotten the tattoo during a weekend in the city with some friends, drunk off his ass and thinking it was funny. But now, after everything that's happened, I can't stop thinking about that guy from the gas station. What if the tattoo wasn't just a coincidence? What if Mike had been marked? I started driving, barely paying attention to where I was going. My mind was running a mile a minute, trying to make sense of all the pieces. The diary, the symbol, the guy from the gas station, it was all connected somehow. But how? And why me? Why Mike? I must have been driving for hours before I realized where I was heading. The gas station. The place where it all started. I hadn't been there in years, but as soon as I pulled into the parking lot, the memories came rushing back. The smell of cheap gas, the flickering neon sign, the cracked pavement. It hadn't changed a bit. I got out of the car, half expecting the killer to be waiting for me, but the place was deserted. Just an empty, run-down gas station in the middle of nowhere. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe some kind of clue, something that would give me a lead on who this guy was and why he'd been following us. I walked around the back of the building, where the dumpsters were. The alley was dark and reeked of trash, but something caught my eye. There, carved into the side of the building, was the symbol, the same circle with lines cutting through it. Fresh, like it had been scratched into the wall recently. My blood ran cold. I knew what it meant. He'd been here, and I wasn't alone. Before I could react, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. My heart raced as I turned around, and there, standing in the shadows, was a figure. Tall, hooded, his face obscured by the darkness. But I didn't need to see his face to know who it was. He'd come for me. I backed up, my breath hitching in my throat, trying to figure out my next move. But before I could do anything, the figure stepped into the dim light of the alley. And that's when I saw it. His arm, the same symbol. There he was, standing no more than 10 feet away from me, the killer I'd been running from, the one who had haunted me ever since Mike's death. And I couldn't move. My body locked up, adrenaline surging through me, but I couldn't force myself to take a step. All I could do was stare at him, at that symbol burned into his forearm, the same one Mike had, the same one in the diary. The air in that alley was thick. Everything felt wrong, like the world had tilted on its axis, and this moment was the culmination of something I hadn't even realized I was part of. My breathing was shallow, my vision tunneling as the figure slowly raised his hand. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was letting me see it. His arm, the symbol, he was showing me that this wasn't just some random guy, some freak playing games. This was bigger. It had been planned for a long time, and now it was my turn. I was next. The hood obscured most of his face, but I could just make out his eyes, glinting in the dim light. Cold, empty, like there wasn't even a person behind them, just a shell of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of killing. I took a shaky step back, my mind racing. There was no one around, no witnesses. And I knew if I didn't do something now, I wouldn't make it out of this alley. But what the hell was I supposed to do? I didn't have a weapon, and even if I did, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop him. This guy had been killing people for years. He was prepared. He was always one step ahead. He took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. I wanted to scream, to yell for help, but my throat was tight. and I couldn't get the words out. I could feel the pressure building inside me, the realization that this was it. This was how I was going to die. But then, something clicked. The diary. The diary. I reached into my backpack, fingers fumbling as I yanked it out. The old leather cover felt like it was burning my hands, but I didn't care. I held it up, pointing at the killer, my voice finally coming out in a desperate, shaky breath. "You want this, don't you?" His steps slowed, and for the first time, I saw a reaction. A twitch in his stance, a slight hesitation. His eyes darted to the diary, then back to me. He didn't say a word, but I could tell. This book, this collection of his sick trophies, it mattered to him. It wasn't just a record of his kills, it was part of the ritual, part of whatever twisted game he was playing. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. "If you kill me, you'll never get it back." His head tilted slightly, like he was considering it. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what my next move would be. I knew I couldn't outrun him. He was faster, stronger, and I was already exhausted from being on the edge of a panic attack for the last 24 hours. But I had the diary, and it was the only leverage I had left. "I'll burn it," I said, my voice stronger now. "I swear to God, I'll burn this thing to ash before I let you get your hands on it again." He stopped completely, his body going still. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of traffic from the road behind us. Then, slowly, he pulled back his hood. I almost wished he hadn't. His face was a mess of scars and rough skin, his eyes sunken deep into his skull, surrounded by dark rings like he hadn't slept in years. But it was his expression that terrified me the most. He wasn't angry, he wasn't scared. He looked amused, like this was all part of his plan, like he was toying with me, and now he was enjoying watching me squirm. "You think you can stop this?" His voice was low, raspy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "It doesn't matter. You're already dead." My heart skipped a beat. Mike thought he could stop it too, he continued, stepping forward again. He thought he could figure it all out, but look what happened to him. He was never going to win. Neither are you. I took another step back, gripping the diary tighter. "Why? Why us? What the hell do you want?" He chuckled softly, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "It's not about what I want, it's about the mark." I froze. "The mark?" I asked, glancing down at the symbol on his arm. He nodded, his cold eyes gleaming in the dark. "You've seen it. You know what it means. It's not just a tattoo, it's a promise, a legacy. You were part of this from the beginning, whether you knew it or not. You and Mike, you were chosen." I felt sick. My stomach twisted into knots as the weight of his words settled in. "Chosen for what?" "To be remembered," he said, his voice almost reverent. "To be part of something bigger than yourself. To be part of me." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as I realized what he meant. This wasn't just about killing. This was about passing something on, something darker, more twisted than I could have imagined. He wasn't just taking lives, he was creating a legacy, a chain of violence, a cycle of death that would continue long after he was gone. And now, I was next. I felt the panic rising again, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to keep him talking, had to buy myself time. "You think this ends with me, that I'm just going to accept this?" His smile widened, like I'd said exactly what he wanted to hear. "You don't have a choice. The mark's already on you." That's when I felt it, a burning, itching sensation on my forearm. I looked down, and my blood ran cold. There, on my skin, was the symbol. Faint, but unmistakable, like it had been there all along, waiting for this moment to reveal itself. I stumbled back, my head spinning. How? I hadn't gotten a tattoo. I hadn't even touched the guy. But there it was, clear as day, seared into my skin like a brand. He took another step closer, his voice soft now, almost like a whisper. You can't run from it. It's part of you now. I felt like I was going to throw up. My skin was crawling, my vision blurring as I stared at the symbol, trying to make sense of what was happening. But there was no sense to it. This was beyond anything I could understand, beyond anything anyone could understand. I had to get out. I had to get away from him. With a surge of adrenaline, I grabbed the diary and ran. I didn't even look back. I just sprinted out of that alley, my legs burning, my lungs screaming for air as I tore through the parking lot, across the street, and into the first crowded place I could find. I didn't stop until I was surrounded by people, lights, noise, anything to drown out the silence that had followed me from that alley. I collapsed onto a bench, clutching the diary to my chest, my whole body shaking. I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I looked down at my arm again. The symbol was gone. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and stared harder. Nothing. Just my normal skin, no sign of the mark. Like it had never been there, but I know what I saw, I know it was real. And I know that it's not over. Because when I opened the diary again, flipping through the pages, I found a new entry. It was in my handwriting, the date was tomorrow, and under it a single sentence: the legacy continues.